The British monarchy appears to be a symbol of stability, palaces, ceremonies, centuries-old traditions. But behind this image lies a history marked by wars, betrayals, and struggles for power. Over the course of 1,200 years, the English throne has been on the brink of extinction dozens of times. Kings were overthrown by relatives, heirs died under mysterious circumstances, and powerful dynasties collapsed in a single generation. Some rulers died on the battlefield, while others ended their lives in prison or on the scaffold. In this video, we'll trace the entire history of the English throne, from the first Anglo-Saxon rulers to the modern-day Windsors. You'll see how England was formed, what mistakes destroyed dynasties, and what secret allowed the British crown to retain its place for over 1,000 years.
And to find the answer to this question, we'll have to go back to the very beginning, to a time when the future English crown was not yet a symbol of power, but merely the dream of a few ambitious rulers.
The history of the unified English monarchy dates back to the early 9th century, when the House of Wessex began to gradually dominate its neighbours. Edbert, the powerful King of Wessex, who in 829 managed to force the other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to recognise his supremacy. This was not yet a fully fledged state, but rather a fragile military alliance held together solely by the authority of a single strong leader. Egbert's dynasty faced an incredibly difficult task. They needed to transform this temporary union into a hereditary and stable system of power. But fate had other plans, presenting the young dynasty with the most terrifying challenge in the entire history of their existence on the island. In the mid-9th century, a devastating wave of invasions by the brutal Scandinavian Vikings swept across the coast of England. The scattered Anglo-Saxon armies suffered one defeat after another, and soon the invaders began establishing their own permanent settlements on the island. The Wessex dynasty found itself caught in a vice. Their lands were constantly being ravaged, and their allies were defecting to the stronger enemy. By the 870s, the kingdom was on the brink of total annihilation, and it seemed that the history of the Anglo-Saxons had come to a definitive end. At this critical moment, the fate of the entire nation fell on the shoulders of a young and educated prince. Alfred the Great, an outstanding Anglo-Saxon monarch, managed to organize an effective resistance and reclaim part of the country. In 878, he won a decisive victory at Edington, forcing the Vikings to sign a peace treaty and divide the island into two spheres of influence. Alfred realized that the dynasty would not survive by the sword alone, so he began building fortresses and establishing a standing navy. He personally translated books into English, striving to unite the people not only through fear but also through a shared culture and religion. Thanks to his wisdom, the family not only escaped destruction, but also gained the moral right to rule over all free Englishmen. Alfred's heirs did not rest on their laurels and launched a methodical military campaign to reclaim lost territories. Edward the Elder, Alfred's resolute son, who, step by step, reclaimed the eastern and central lands from the Scandinavian rulers. The dynasty functioned as a single, well-coordinated mechanism. While the king was at war, his sister Ethelfled successfully ruled the allied kingdom of Mercia. By the beginning of the 10th century, the House of Wessex had significantly expanded its borders, becoming the dominant political force across the entire island. Their consistent military successes convinced the local aristocracy that only this family was capable of providing real security. The logical outcome of this long-standing family expansion was the final establishment of a unified state. Aethelstan, Alfred's talented grandson, officially united the entire country in 927 and became the first king of England. He harshly suppressed the resistance of the northern lords and forced the rulers of Scotland and Wales to pay him regular tribute. The dynasty had finally achieved its main goal. The scattered lands were merged into a single centralized administrative system with a unified currency. However, holding on to this vast territory required subsequent rulers to exert an incredible amount of state power. The period of prosperity proved short-lived, as after the death of strong leaders, the dynasty began to face internal conflicts. Athelstan's heirs constantly struggled with separatist sentiments in the north of the country, where the local elite refused to submit to the southern kings. Power constantly shifted from one brother to another, creating dangerous political instability and weakening the king's authority. It was not until the mid-10th century that Edgar the Peaceful, a wise ruler, managed to establish peaceful coexistence among the various ethnic groups in the kingdom. Under his reign, the dynasty experienced its golden age, cementing its status as the chief defenders of the church and the makers of laws.
But the real disaster for the House of Wessex struck at the turn of the 10th and 11th centuries, when the extremely weak ruler,
Ethelred the Unready, a king whose indecisiveness provoked the return of aggressive Danish invaders to the British shores. Instead of mounting an armed resistance against the enemy, he tried to buy them off with huge sums of money, which only fueled the Vikings' greed. This disastrous policy led to the people becoming completely disillusioned with their ruling dynasty and losing all trust in it. In 1013, Ethelred was forced to flee the country in disgrace, ceding his throne to foreign conquerors, was succeeded by Canute the Great, a powerful Danish king who seized England by force and integrated it into his vast northern empire. Although he overthrew the old dynasty, Canute proved to be a very pragmatic and far-sighted statesman. He retained most of the English laws and even married Ethelred's widow to lend his rule at least some legitimacy. The presence of a foreign dynasty on the throne gave the country 2 decades of long-awaited peace and economic prosperity. However, after Canute's death, his own family quickly became embroiled in bloody internecine strife over the right of succession. This Scandinavian crisis allowed the old Anglo-Saxon dynasty to make its final, though very brief, attempt to return to power. Edward the Confessor, the deeply religious son of Ethelred, was peacefully restored to the throne in 1042. He ruled the country with the support of powerful aristocratic clans, but committed the cardinal sin of any monarch by failing to leave a direct heir. His death in early 1066 set in motion an irreversible chain of events leading to a devastating succession crisis. Harold Godwinson, an influential English earl who was hastily crowned, became the last representative of the Anglo-Saxon era. Harold's coronation provoked fury beyond the island, as several foreign rulers simultaneously laid claim to the English throne. The Anglo-Saxon dynasty, having survived Viking invasions and internal strife, faced an adversary who would forever alter the course of history. The old elite was too exhausted by centuries of conflict to withstand the onslaught of a new, more organized military machine. Ahead lay the most radical and bloody political upheaval the country had ever seen. The Norman conquest was just around the corner, poised to rewrite the laws of the English monarchy forever. In the fall of 1066, the Anglo-Saxon era came to an end in the brutal Battle of Hastings, where the English army was completely destroyed. William the the Conqueror, a ruthless Norman duke who seized the throne by the sword and founded a new ruling dynasty. The arrival of the Normans was not merely a change of king, it was a complete replacement of the country's entire political, military, and religious elite. William methodically seized lands from the old Anglo-Saxon lords and distributed them to his loyal French-speaking knights. The new dynasty ruled the conquered people as if they were enemy territory, relying solely on fear and a system of impregnable stone castles. The Norman rulers were distinguished by their incredible pragmatism and their drive for total control over all the state's resources. In 1086, William conducted a massive census of the population and lands, the results of which were recorded in the Domesday Book. This census allowed the monarch to know exactly from whom and how much tax he could collect to finance his army. The conqueror's family was obsessed with power, which inevitably led to brutal conflicts even within their own inner circle. William's sons hated one another and were constantly scheming, trying to deprive their own brothers of their inheritance. After the conqueror's death, the crown passed to his cruel and greedy middle son, who intensified the pressure on the country even further. William II Rufus, a tyrannical king who reigned from 1087, constantly clashing with the church and extorting money from the barons. His reign revealed the full brutality of the Norman system, in which the monarch considered himself the absolute owner of every scrap of land. Dissatisfaction in society was growing, but no one dared to openly oppose this fearsome and unpredictable ruler. His sudden death while hunting in 1100 is still considered by many historians to have been a well-planned political assassination. Rufus's death allowed the younger member of the dynasty to swiftly seize the vacant throne, beating his older brother to it. Henry I, an educated and shrewd monarch, ruled the country with a firm hand and established an efficient state bureaucracy. He attempted to reconcile two warring peoples by marrying a princess of Anglo-Saxon descent and issuing a Charter of Liberties. Henry significantly strengthened the legal system by establishing professional courts that worked in the interests of the royal treasury. The dynasty seemed incredibly stable and powerful until a random tragedy shattered the old king's plans. In 1120, Henry I's only legitimate son and heir tragically drowned during the sinking of the White Ship in the English Channel. This disaster dealt a fatal blow to the Norman dynasty, as the king was left without a male heir. In desperation, Henry forced all the English barons to swear allegiance to his only daughter. Matilda, a proud and imperious princess whose claim to the throne was categorically rejected by the conservative aristocracy because of her gender. The king's death in 1135 instantly exposed all the deep-seated divisions in society and sparked the start of a civil war. The aristocracy refused to submit to a woman and supported another member of the royal family, who quickly arrived in London. Stephen of Blois, the cunning nephew of Henry I, illegally usurped the throne, breaking his oath of allegiance to Matilda. This move split the country into two irreconcilable camps, marking the beginning of a long period known as the Anarchy. The barons skillfully manipulated both pretenders to the throne, constantly switching sides in the conflict for personal financial gain. Central authority completely collapsed, and England plunged into 2 decades of looting, violence, and utter lawlessness. The Norman dynasty was effectively devouring itself in this senseless and incredibly destructive civil war. Stephen's and Matilda's armies chased each other for years, besieging castles and burning entire towns to the ground. The kingdom's economy was completely destroyed, and ordinary people suffered from horrific famine and the tyranny of mercenaries. Stephen proved too soft a ruler to restore order, and Matilda too arrogant to win the people's love. This dynastic deadlock could have lasted forever had a completely new force not appeared on the political scene. Matilda's son, a young and energetic duke, decided to take matters into his own hands and reclaim his mother's rightful inheritance. In 1153, he landed in England with a powerful army, forcing Stephen, weary of endless war, to agree to peace negotiations. A historic treaty was signed, under which Stephen remained king for the rest of his life, but Matilda's son became his heir. This compromise marked the de facto end of the pure Norman dynasty, which in less than a century had managed to conquer, rebuild, and destroy the country. In 1154, Stephen died, and the crown peacefully passed to the founder of a new, incredibly ambitious royal family.
The arrival of the new dynasty marked the beginning of a completely different era in the history of the English state.
The Norman era left behind massive stone cathedrals, gloomy castles, and a deep cultural divide between the elite and the people. However, it was precisely their brutal methods of governance that laid the foundation for a future centralized and powerful European kingdom. The Normans taught England to live by the strict rules of the feudal system, where everything was subject to the will of the monarch. Now this battle-hardened country was coming under the rule of a family that dreamed of creating a great continental empire. The Plantagenet dynasty began its long and incredibly turbulent reign in 1154, when a young ruler united vast territories. Henry II was the first king of this dynasty, who, thanks to a successful marriage and inheritance, became the ruler of the vast Angevin Empire. His lands stretched from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees, making him more powerful than the King of France himself. Henry was an incredibly energetic monarch. He constantly traveled throughout his domains, restoring law and order after the devastating anarchy. He laid the foundations of modern English common law by establishing a system of circuit courts and jury trials. However, the power of this family was always accompanied by their famously explosive temperaments and constant internal strife. Henry II entered into a bitter conflict with the Church, which ended with the tragic murder of Archbishop Thomas Becket in 1170. But the main threat came from his own wife and sons, who constantly staged armed rebellions against him. His sons demanded real power and lands, while the aging king categorically refused to share his authority. This family drama literally tore the empire apart until Henry died in 1189, betrayed by all his children. Richard I, the Lionheart, the famous warrior king who inherited the throne and immediately set off on the Third Crusade. For this dynasty, England was often merely a convenient source of funds for waging large-scale wars on the continent or in the Middle East. During his 10-year reign, Richard spent only a few months on the island, extracting enormous taxes from the country. His brilliant military victories brought fame to the dynasty throughout Europe, but did nothing to aid the internal development of the state. Richard's accidental death in 1199 handed the vast empire over to his far less talented younger brother. John Lackland, the king whose disastrous reign led the dynasty to lose nearly all of its French territories. In an attempt to reclaim the lost lands, he imposed exorbitant taxes on the English barons, which provoked a massive revolt by the aristocracy. In 1215, the rebellious lords forced John to sign the Magna Carta, a document that permanently limited the monarchy's arbitrary power. This was a turning point for the Plantagenets. For the first time, they legally acknowledged that even the king must obey the law. John died in the midst of a civil war in 1216, leaving his young son a divided and very weak country. Henry III, a young king who had to struggle for decades to restore his family's authority. His long reign was marked by constant conflicts with Parliament, which increasingly demanded control over government spending. In 1265, opposition leader Simon de Montfort even temporarily seized power, convening the first true parliament with the participation of ordinary citizens. The Plantagenets learned a harsh lesson. To govern such a complex country, kings had to negotiate with the political elite. The dynasty survived only thanks to the military talents of Henry's eldest son, who brutally crushed the rebels and restored power to his father. Edward I Longshanks, a stern and resolute monarch who reigned from 1272, transformed England into a powerful military machine. He realized that to strengthen the dynasty, he needed to expand the borders not in France, but on the British Isles themselves. Edward waged a brilliant and brutal campaign to conquer Wales, building a ring of impregnable stone castles there. He then launched a long and bloody war to subjugate Scotland, for which he earned the nickname the Hammer of the Scots. Under his rule, the monarchy reached unprecedented power, actively developing legislation and regularly convening Parliament to approve taxes. However, the strength of the Plantagenets always depended exclusively on the personal qualities of the specific ruler sitting on the throne. Edward II, a weak and frivolous heir, who in 1314 suffered a catastrophic defeat at the hands of the Scots in the Battle of Bannockburn. His reign was marked by favoritism, economic crisis, and rebellions by the barons, who despised their weak-willed king. As a result, the dynasty once again faced betrayal within the family. Edward II was overthrown by his own wife, Isabella. In 1327, the king was brutally murdered in prison, and power passed to his ambitious young son, who was tasked with restoring the family's honor. Edward III was a brilliant military leader who, in 1337, dragged the country into the epic 100 Years' War over the French throne. Under his rule, the English army won legendary victories at Crécy and Poitiers, restoring the Plantagenets' reputation as great warriors. Not even the terrible Black Death epidemic of 1348 could break the power of his centralized and efficient government. Edward III established the famous Order of the Garter, uniting the highest aristocracy around the ideals of chivalry and loyalty to the crown. But his decision to bequeath vast estates to his numerous sons planted a time bomb under the dynasty itself. Richard II, the last direct descendant of the Plantagenets, became king in 1377 while still a child. As an adult, he came to believe in his absolute divine right to rule and began to brutally repress his powerful relatives. His tyranny and paranoia turned the entire political elite of the country against him, as they had grown weary of the endless executions and confiscations. In 1399, Richard made a fatal mistake by seizing the inheritance of his cousin, who was in exile. This act provoked a coup d'état that brought the reign of the main branch of the great Plantagenet dynasty to a permanent end. The overthrow of Richard II opened a completely new and incredibly bloody chapter in the history of the English monarchy. Power was seized by a collateral branch of the family, which was bound to lead to long dynastic disputes. The fact that the crown could simply be taken by force of arms forever shattered the sacred aura of monarchical inviolability. The Plantagenets ruled England for 245 years, establishing the modern legal system, parliament, and the culture of chivalry.
Now their descendants were set to engage in a brutal struggle against one another, fighting for total and absolute annihilation.
The seizure of power in 1399 marked the beginning of the reign of the Lancasters, the first collateral branch of the great Plantagenet family. Henry IV, an ambitious duke who overthrew his cousin and became king solely by force. His rise to power was not recognized by many aristocrats, which made the new dynasty's position incredibly fragile and vulnerable. Throughout his reign, Henry IV was forced to contend with constant armed rebellions in Wales and northern England. He was constantly in need of money and parliamentary support just to keep the illegitimately acquired crown on his head. The Lancasters were well aware that their legitimacy raised serious questions both within the country and beyond its borders. To prove their right to the throne, they needed to demonstrate extraordinary achievements that would make the public forget about the usurpation. Henry IV suffered from severe illnesses throughout his life, which many contemporaries considered divine punishment for the murder of the rightful king. Before his death in 1413, he handed over to his son a country that had been pacified but was still deeply divided. The new king had to find a grand national idea that could finally unite the entire nation around the House of Lancaster. Henry V, a brilliant young commander, decided that the best way to unite the country would be a large-scale victorious war. He reignited the protracted conflict with France, making bold claims to the French throne to distract the lords from domestic intrigues. In 1415, his army won a crushing victory at the Battle of Agincourt, where the famous English archers decimated the flower of French chivalry. This triumph instantly made Henry a national hero and fully legitimized the House of Lancaster in the eyes of the entire nation. It seemed that this family had been chosen by God himself to create the greatest European empire of the time. Brilliant military and diplomatic successes led to the signing of a treaty in 1420, under which Henry became heir to France. The Lancasters had reached the peak of their power. They controlled England and were confidently preparing to annex French lands to it. However, fate dealt the dynasty the cruelest and most unexpected blow at the most inopportune historical moment. In 1422, Henry V died suddenly of a severe illness in a military camp, never having had the chance to don the French crown. This entire vast and unstable legacy passed to his 9-month-old son, marking the beginning of the end of the Lancastrians' greatness. Henry VI, a child king, whose vast empire was ruled for many years by a council of ambitious and greedy aristocrats. As the monarch grew older, it became clear that he had not inherited any of the leadership qualities of his famous and powerful father. He was a peace-loving, devout, and incredibly weak man who was more interested in religion than in governing the state. With such a weak-willed ruler, court factions began openly vying for real power and influence over the king. Corruption was on the rise, the economy was in decline, and French territories were being rapidly recaptured by the armies of Joan of Arc. By 1453, the Lancastrians had suffered a humiliating defeat in the 100 Years' War, losing all their continental holdings except for the small port of Calais. This national catastrophe coincided with the onset of severe and prolonged bouts of mental illness in Henry VI. The king could go months without reacting to the world around him, completely handing over control of the country to his domineering wife, Margaret of Anjou. The weakness of central authority led powerful lords to begin creating their own private armies. The country was rapidly descending into anarchy as the law ceased to function without a strong and authoritarian monarch. The political vacuum was bound to be filled by another ambitious family that also had legitimate claims to the throne. Richard of York, an influential aristocrat, accused the Lancasters of bringing the country to ruin and openly declared his claim to the crown. In 1455, tensions erupted into open-armed conflict, marking the beginning of the Bloody War of the Roses. The House of Lancaster, which had so triumphantly united the nation just a few decades earlier, had now itself become the cause of a civil war. The English aristocracy split into two camps, each ready to ruthlessly destroy the other for control over the incapacitated king. Margaret of Anjou desperately and fiercely defended the rights of her mad husband and young son to the English throne. The war reached unprecedented proportions. Armies fought with such ferocity that entire noble houses vanished from the face of the earth. Henry VI was taken prisoner several times, deposed from the throne, and restored to it, becoming nothing more than a puppet in the hands of powerful lords. In 1461, the Lancastrian forces suffered a crushing defeat in the snowy Battle of Tewkesbury, the bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. The ailing king was finally deposed, and power passed to the stronger and more aggressive Yorkist dynasty. The Lancastrians tried for several more years to organize resistance from exile, but their cause was finally lost in 1471. In the decisive battles, Henry VI's sole heir was killed, and the mad monarch himself was secretly strangled in the Tower. The brief but incredibly vivid era of the Lancasters officially ended with the complete and utter collapse of their entire family. They ruled for just over 60 years, bestowing upon England its greatest military triumphs and plunging it into its most terrible civil war.
Now their mortal enemies had firmly established themselves on the throne, and they had to prove their right to rule a torn country.
The victory in 1461 brought the Yorkist dynasty to power, promising a strong hand and long-awaited order to a weary nation. Edward IV, the first king of this dynasty, was a young, charismatic, and incredibly successful military leader who had never lost a battle. He brutally suppressed pockets of Lancastrian resistance, confiscated the rebels' lands, and quickly replenished the empty state treasury. The new monarch actively encouraged trade, concluded favorable treaties with European powers, and restored London's economic prosperity. It seemed that the Yorks had finally brought long-awaited peace to England, but their main problem lay within the family itself. Edward IV made a fateful diplomatic blunder by secretly marrying the commoner widow Elizabeth Woodville, disregarding the interests of the state. This marriage led to the new Queen's relatives rapidly monopolizing all the lucrative positions at the royal court. The old aristocracy, which had helped the Yorks come to power, felt deeply insulted and shortchanged. The powerful Lord Warwick, and former tutor to the king, decided to avenge this humiliation and raised an armed rebellion. The family conflict instantly escalated into a new phase of civil war, as former friends began to ruthlessly destroy one another. In 1470, Warwick forced Edward IV to flee the country and even briefly restored the mad Lancastrian king to the throne. However, the Yorkist dynasty demonstrated remarkable resilience. Just a year later, Edward returned with a new mercenary army. In a lightning campaign, he finally crushed all his enemies, personally killed the Lancaster heir, and executed the traitors. The second half of Edward's reign was peaceful and lavish. He collected books, built magnificent palaces, and enjoyed life. But his sudden death in 1483 left the dynasty in an extremely vulnerable position, as the heir was still a child. Edward V, a 12-year-old king who inherited the throne but never officially underwent the coronation ceremony. Relatives of Queen Mother Woodville immediately attempted to seize the regency to preserve their immense influence in the country. However, the late king had an incredibly ambitious and cruel brother who had no intention of handing over power to upstarts. Richard III, the young king's uncle, who held the office of Lord Protector and enjoyed enormous support from the northern barons. He swiftly arrested all key Woodville supporters and took the young monarch under his strict personal control. Instead of protecting his nephew, Richard carried out one of the most scandalous coups in British history. In the summer of 1483, he declared his late brother's marriage illegal and both of his nephew's bastards, stripped of their rights to the throne. The young princes were imprisoned in the Tower, where they soon vanished without a trace and forever, leaving the darkest stain on the dynasty's reputation. Richard III hastily crowned himself, hoping that his decisiveness and willingness to take extreme measures would force society to submit. However, this monstrous crime alienated even the most loyal and long-standing supporters of the House of York. Richard III's reign was short and incredibly tense, as he constantly feared conspiracies and betrayals. Despite attempts to implement fair judicial reforms, his power rested solely on military force and fear. The southern aristocracy openly hated the usurper and began seeking any opportunity to permanently depose him from the throne. The internal rift within the York dynasty reached such proportions that they themselves paved the way for their ultimate downfall. The king's enemies rallied around the last, seemingly insignificant claimant to the throne, who was in exile, Henry Tudor, a young man with very tenuous family ties to the Lancasters, who promised to unite the feuding families. In August 1485, he landed in England, and disgruntled Yorkist lords began flocking to join his small army. The decisive Battle of Bosworth was the logical conclusion to the bloody history of the Plantagenets and their collateral branches. Richard III fought bravely and personally led the cavalry into the attack, but was betrayed by his key commanders right on the battlefield. The last king of the Yorkist dynasty was killed, and his crown was removed from his dead body and given to the new victor. The fall of the Yorks marked the end of an entire historical era when English barons could dictate their will to kings. This short-lived dynasty lasted only 24 years in power, but managed to leave behind an incredibly bloody legacy. Henry VII became the founder of the Tudor dynasty, seizing power on the battlefield and promising the country an end to civil wars forever. He was an incredibly pragmatic, cautious, and highly suspicious monarch who trusted no one in his inner circle. To definitively legitimize his power, he married Princess Elizabeth of York, uniting the red and white roses into a single symbol. Henry VII methodically stripped the old aristocracy of the right to maintain private armies and ruthlessly imposed huge fines on them. By the end of his reign, he had amassed an astronomical sum of money in the treasury, providing his dynasty with a solid financial foundation. However, the true drama of the Tudors unfolded in the next generation, when a young and incredibly ambitious heir ascended the throne. Henry VIII, a charismatic monarch who reigned from 1509, quickly squandered his father's wealth on lavish tournaments and senseless wars. His main obsession in life became the birth of a legitimate male heir to continue the fragile Tudor line. When his first wife was unable to bear a son and the Pope refused to grant a divorce, the king took an unprecedented political step. In 1534, he completely severed ties with Rome, declaring himself the sole head of the new independent Anglican Church. This religious schism radically altered the entire structure of English society and led to large-scale bloody repression. Henry VIII ordered the closure of all monasteries, confiscating their vast landholdings to enrich his loyal new elite. Anyone who refused to recognize the king as the supreme head of the church was immediately sent to the scaffold on charges of treason. During his lifetime, this suspicious tyrant had 6 wives, 2 of whom he brutally executed on trumped-up charges. By the end of his life, Henry had become a sick, paranoid dictator, leaving behind a deeply divided country and a young son. Edward VI, a 9-year-old king, under whose reign religious reforms took on an even more radical Protestant character. The regents of the young monarch strictly banned Catholic masses and began destroying icons and statues in ancient English churches. This sparked open discontent among the common people, who did not want to abandon the faith of their ancestors so quickly. The tragic death of the ailing Edward in 1553 triggered a new dynastic crisis, as he had illegally bequeathed the crown to his cousin. This attempt to remove his Catholic sister from power failed spectacularly, and the rightful heiress made a triumphant entry into London. Mary I was the first woman to become the rightful Queen of England, and she was fanatically determined to restore Catholicism in the country. During her short reign, the country experienced a veritable religious terror, with hundreds of Protestants burned alive at the stake. Her unpopular marriage to the King of Spain and the loss of the last French port, Calais, only intensified the people's hatred for the monarch. Known in history as Bloody Mary, she died in 1558 without ever giving birth to the long-awaited Catholic heir to the throne. The country was exhausted by religious upheavals, inflation, and political instability when the crown passed to the last of the Tudors. Elizabeth I, the youngest daughter of Henry VIII, proved to be the most outstanding and astute politician of the entire Tudor dynasty. Upon ascending the throne, she immediately struck a sensible religious compromise that finally put an end to the bloody interdenominational strife in the country. Elizabeth masterfully manipulated European monarchs, negotiating a potential marriage for years but never actually marrying. She publicly declared that she was betrothed to her people, turning her status as the Virgin Queen into a powerful tool of state propaganda. Her wise reign brought England long-awaited internal stability and an unprecedented cultural and economic flourishing. It was under Elizabeth that England began its historic journey toward becoming a great global naval power. Her privateers, such as Francis Drake, plundered Spanish gold galleons with impunity and undertook daring voyages around the world. In 1588, the English fleet achieved the impossible by defeating the Spanish Armada, saving the country from an imminent Catholic invasion. In London, the brilliant William Shakespeare was at work. The economy was growing rapidly, and English merchants began actively exploring new global markets. However, the Tudors' main problem remained unresolved. The aging queen had no direct, legitimate heirs to continue the dynasty. In 1603, the great Queen Elizabeth I passed away peacefully, bringing the 118-year-long, incredibly vibrant Tudor era to a permanent close. This dynasty, brief in duration, yet monumental in scope, completely transformed the face of the English state and society. They subdued the rebellious barons, built a powerful navy, and separated the Church of England from Rome's direct influence. Their ministers had prepared in advance, and with great care, for the peaceful transfer of power to the king of neighbouring and independent Scotland. England was ready to welcome the new Stuart dynasty, which would soon attempt to establish an absolute monarchy and pay for it with their heads. The Stuart dynasty ascended the English throne in 1603, when the Scottish King James I peacefully united the two crowns. This was a family that sincerely and deeply believed in the concept of the absolute divine right of kings to unlimited power. James I openly despised England's parliamentary traditions, believing that a monarch was accountable for his actions only to God. His reign began with a shock. In 1605, radical Catholics attempted to blow up the king and the entire parliament during the Gunpowder Plot. The plot was uncovered, but it forever sowed deep mistrust and fear of any Catholic conspiracies within society. Despite political friction, the early Stuart era brought the country a long period of peace and marked the beginning of active colonization of North America. However, James I constantly irritated Parliament with his lavish spending on favourites and his unwillingness to heed the opinions of the political elite. The conflict between the crown and society reached a critical point when his incredibly arrogant and stubborn son ascended the throne in 1625. Charles I, a monarch who decided to rule absolutely alone and, for 11 long years, completely dissolved the unwelcome English Parliament. He imposed illegal taxes, cruelly punished critics, and attempted to impose uniform and strict church rules on the entire country. Charles I's despotic policies inevitably led to a massive political explosion and a catastrophic split in English society. In 1642, the king attempted to forcibly arrest opposition MPs right inside the Parliament building, which marked the beginning of the Civil War. The country split into supporters of the monarchy and defenders of Parliament, plunging into several years of bloody and incredibly brutal battles. The new-style army created by Parliament proved to be far more disciplined and motivated than the king's noble cavalry. As a result, Charles I suffered a crushing defeat, was taken prisoner, but categorically refused to make any political compromises. The Stuarts' stubbornness cost them not only their power, but also the monarch's life, which was an unprecedented event in Europe. In January 1649, at the initiative of Oliver Cromwell, Charles I was publicly condemned and brutally beheaded in central London. The monarchy was officially abolished, and England became a strict Puritan republic under Cromwell's military control for a decade. However, the Republican experiment proved too harsh. Theatres, holidays, and all public entertainment were banned. After Cromwell's death, the military regime quickly collapsed, and a society weary of strict prohibitions joyfully called the Stuarts back. In 1660, Charles II made a triumphant return to London, restoring the monarchy and ushering in the Restoration era, full of revelry and cynicism. The new king was an incredibly shrewd pragmatist who skillfully balanced the various political factions and avoided open conflict. Under his reign, the country endured a terrible plague epidemic and the catastrophic Great Fire of London, after which the capital was rebuilt. Charles II reigned until 1685, deftly navigating political pitfalls, but his brother and heir proved utterly incapable of compromise. James II, a fanatical Catholic, managed, during his 3-year reign, to alienate the entire Protestant elite of the country. James II began appointing Catholics en masse to the highest government and military posts, grossly violating existing British laws. When the king unexpectedly had a Catholic son, Parliament, in a panic, decided to stage a bloodless coup d'etat to save the Protestant faith. In 1688, the Glorious Revolution took place. James II fled cowardly to France, and the throne was passed to his Protestant daughter Mary and her husband. William III and Mary II signed the historic Bill of Rights, which definitively and permanently stripped the monarchy of absolute political power. From then on, the king could not make laws, collect taxes, or maintain an army without the direct consent of an independent parliament. After William's death in 1702, the crown passed to Anne, the last direct descendant of the complex and tragic Stuart dynasty. Her reign was marked by a great historical event. In 1707, England and Scotland officially united, creating a single Great Britain. Anne suffered a terrible personal tragedy, burying all 17 of her children, which created a huge problem for the succession to the throne. Parliament passed a strict law prohibiting Catholics from ever occupying the British throne, to permanently rule out the return of the deposed Stuart branch.
When the Queen died in 1714, the crown passed to distant German relatives, ushering in the era of the House of Hanover.
The House of Hanover ascended to the British throne in 1714 due to strict parliamentary laws regarding Protestant succession. George I, a German elector who spoke virtually no English and viewed his new kingdom as a convenient addition to his native lands. Due to his limited knowledge of the language and the laws, he stopped attending government meetings, handing over the actual governance of the country to his ministers. It was during this period that the British parliamentary system took on its modern form, and the office of Prime Minister became a key position in the state. The House of Hanover brought stability to the country, allowing the economy and the colonial empire to develop without direct interference from the crown. His son, George II, who reigned from 1727, was a more hot-tempered monarch, but on the whole continued the policy of limited interference in parliamentary affairs. Under him, Britain began actively driving out its French rivals from India and North America, rapidly expanding the empire's borders. George II went down in history as the last British king to personally lead his troops into a major European battle in 1743. Wealth from all over the world flowed into London, financing the beginning of an incredible and unprecedented industrial revolution. However, the real trials for the dynasty began during the reign of the next monarch, who decided to be a truly British king. George III, the first Hanoverian born in England, whose incredibly long reign, beginning in 1760, was filled with spectacular triumphs and catastrophes. He attempted to strengthen the crown's influence over politics, which led to a series of serious crises and conflicts with the American colonists. In 1783, Britain suffered the most painful defeat in its history, permanently losing control of the United States of America. Despite this blow, the empire managed to recover and soon entered into a long, deadly struggle with Napoleonic France. Unfortunately, George III himself suffered from severe bouts of mental illness toward the end of his life, becoming merely a figurehead ruler of a vast empire. While the old king was kept in strict isolation, the country was ruled by his scandalous son, the Prince Regent, who became George IV in 1820. This monarch became notorious for his colossal debts, selfishness, and extremely extravagant lifestyle, which provoked deep contempt in society. He was briefly succeeded by William IV, during whose reign a major parliamentary reform was passed in 1832, expanding citizens' voting rights. By this time, the authority of the House of Hanover had reached an all-time low, and the monarchy was in urgent need of a moral renewal. The crown's salvation came in the form of a young 18-year-old girl who ascended the throne in 1837 and forever changed the image of the monarch. Queen Victoria, a ruler whose name became synonymous with an entire great era and the highest standards of public morality. During her 63-year reign, Britain reached the peak of its imperial power, controlling a quarter of the world's population. Victoria and her husband Albert created the ideal image of a strong royal family, which became the absolute standard for the entire British middle class. After her husband's death in 1861, the Queen wore deep mourning for the rest of her life, becoming a sacred and inviolable symbol of the nation. When Victoria died in 1901, the House of Hanover came to an end, as the crown passed to her husband's heirs. The early 20th century brought the Saxe-Coburg and Gotha dynasty to the British throne, a dynasty that was soon forced to radically change its name. Edward VII, who reigned from 1901, was a bon vivant whose successful diplomacy helped Britain emerge from international isolation. However, his son, George V, had to rule the country during the most terrible and bloody period of World War I. In 1917, against a backdrop of strong anti-German sentiment in society, the king made the historic decision to completely renounce all German titles. The dynasty was officially renamed the House of Windsor, underscoring their absolute loyalty and belonging to the British nation. George V proved to be an incredibly wise ruler who understood that in an age of revolutions, the monarchy could survive only through the sincere love of the people. While other empires were collapsing, the British king constantly visited factories and hospitals, demonstrating complete solidarity with his suffering subjects. However, in 1936, the dynasty faced a profound crisis when the new king, Edward VIII, decided to marry a twice-divorced American woman. The government and the church categorically rejected this marriage, forcing the monarch to make a difficult choice between the crown and personal happiness. Edward VIII voluntarily abdicated the throne, becoming the first monarch in history to renounce power for the sake of love. The crown unexpectedly passed to his modest, stuttering younger brother, who became King George VI during Europe's most turbulent times. During World War II, he and his family refused to leave London, which was constantly subjected to brutal Nazi bombings. The royal couple regularly toured the ruins and became a living symbol of the incredible resilience and courage of the entire British people. After the war, the empire began to rapidly disintegrate, and George VI became the head of the new Commonwealth of Nations, adapting the monarchy to the new realities. In 1952, his death passed the crown to a young princess who was destined to reign longer than anyone else in British history, Elizabeth II, a queen whose 70-year reign served as a bridge between post-war imperial Britain and the modern digital society. She masterfully fulfilled the role of a politically neutral head of state, becoming an absolute guarantor of stability in a rapidly changing and unpredictable world. The monarchy had to weather numerous public scandals and crises, including the tragic death of Princess Diana in 1997. To remain relevant, the Windsors began paying taxes, opened their palaces to tourists, and became more open to the press. Elizabeth II transformed an outdated medieval institution into a powerful global cultural and diplomatic brand. In September 2022, the Great Queen passed away, and the throne was taken by her 73-year-old son, Charles III.
The modern British monarchy is completely devoid of real executive power, but it retains enormous symbolic and cultural significance for the nation.
The king continues centuries-old traditions, serving as the nation's chief diplomat and actively supporting charitable and environmental initiatives. The centuries-old chain of succession, which began with the ruthless Anglo-Saxon chieftains of the 9th century, continues successfully into the 21st century. The Windsors have proven that the secret to the survival of any dynasty lies in the ability to listen to its people and evolve with the times. Today, when we see Buckingham Palace and lavish royal ceremonies, we are looking at the result of a centuries-long historical compromise. This monarchy has survived an era of global world wars, severe economic crises, and the rapid development of information technology. It has proven that ancient traditions can successfully coexist with democracy if they serve as a unifying symbol for the entire nation, rather than an instrument of oppression. The entire line of British monarchs has taken shape over nearly 1,200 years of uninterrupted history of the crown, a history that continues to be written before our very eyes. And as long as this ancient institution remains capable of evolving and reflecting the values of its people, the English throne will remain unshakable.